Committee is a group of lawyers at the Bar Association who work to support the American Bar Association's goal of abolishing capital punishment in the United States and internationally. We do that through coordinating programs and events such as this. We also put out reports and we do public education as well. We also have a summer training and an awards ceremony. Every year we acknowledge distinguished people, people who have get these distinguished service awards for dedicating their work, their careers to the representation of condemned individuals in an extraordinary fashion. And I'm proud that two of our recent awardees are sitting here today. I've been asked just to briefly introduce the issue of capital punishment. I know there are some people in this room who are very familiar with the issue, others who aren't. So I'm just going to briefly frame it for you. Currently, there are 2,656 people on death row in the United States. That includes the federal death penalty, the people on federal death row as well. There are currently 32 states that either don't have capital punishment currently or haven't executed anyone in the last decade. So the practice is on the decline, but there still are quite a number of people on death row across the country. There's been 1,512 executions since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. And there's been 22 this year. Our committee sometimes said we dispatch members into high schools to talk about capital punishment, and you know, I think capital punishment is a very dramatic way to introduce a lot of issues that are endemic in our criminal justice system. In particular, the issues of innocence. There's, I think right now, for every 9 people who are executed, 1 person is exonerated from death row. The cost of capital punishment, it's about 3 to 4 times. Studies have shown it's about 3 to 4 times what it would cost to keep someone in prison without parole. Racial issues, obviously, that attend the imposition of the death penalty when prosecutors seek the death penalty. In particular, the race of the victim, which tends to, if the victim is white, I think 75% of people who have been executed the victim has been white. Those numbers are even more stark when the defendant is not white. And then this issue is increasingly isolated in terms of the geography. And then in terms of the number of states that are carrying out executions and sentencing people to death. This year it was 7 states, and that's even more localized when you get to at the county level. And then of course the issues of deterrence and does this practice prevent crime? Does it keep people safer? Certainly the statistics show that there's where they execute most people in the South, the murder rates are the highest anywhere in the country. So these are all issues where I think there are a lot of entry points into the conversations around this issue. I think what this movie does so well is just illustrate another set of issues that aren't discussed quite as often, and that's the collateral effects of the death penalty, the secondary trauma of this practice on, in this movie, obviously the warden tasked with carrying this out, but also her family members, the other people who work in the facility, the chaplain, the attorneys who represent people who are condemned. The list goes on. So I'm very happy to have some people sitting next to me who are all too familiar with this system and can speak to their own experience, some of the themes in this movie. So I'm going to introduce them now. Bear with me. To my right is Christina Swarns. Christina Swarns is the president and attorney in charge of the Office of the Appellate Defender. That's OAD. OAD is one of New York City's oldest providers of appellate representation to poor people convicted of felonies, the city's second oldest institutional indigent defense office, and a national model of effective, innovative, and holistic appellate defense representation. Prior to joining OAD, Christina served as the litigation director for the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, LDF, and in that capacity, she oversaw all aspects of LDF's economic justice, education, political participation, and criminal justice litigation. While at LDF, Christina also served as lead counsel in some of this country's highest profile death penalty cases. She argued and won Buck v. Davis, a Texas death penalty case challenging the introduction of explicitly racially based evidence at trial in the 2016 to 2017 term of the United States Supreme Court. To her right, we're very happy to have Five Molly Mock, who is the Executive Director of the Incarcerated Nation Network, Inc., which is a collective of post-incarcerated leaders who all operate projects that serve those who are directly impacted. Five served 12 years incarcerated, including several years in solitary confinement. And since his return to society, Five has worked against state-sanctioned torture. He is a member of OPCAT, the UN Optical Protocol on Torture, and is a member of the Anti-Torture Initiative with Juan Mendez, founded at the United Nations. He is also a human rights defender with the ACLU and a human rights ambassador for TROA, a rabbinical call for justice with Human Rights Watch. After several years of creating youth development programs, Five now trains young credible messengers at the Incarcerated Nation Institute for transformative mentoring at the New School. Five's work to end solitary confinement has had a national impact, influencing President Obama's 2016 decision to end solitary confinement for juveniles in the federal system. Currently, Five still works to produce films, TV segments, and educational events that reveal the conditions of confinement and the collateral consequences of mass incarceration for millions of people. He was a 2016 Columbia University Justice in Education Scholar. And at the end, we're pleased to have George Kendall with us. George has practiced criminal and appellate law in DC for 4 years with Canaan, Burns, and O'Toole. From 1983 through 2003, he devoted nearly his entire practice to representing indigent condemned prisoners, first with the Atlanta-based ACLU Capital Representation Project, and later with NAACP LDF here in New York. Since moving to private practice in 2003, he has continued to devote all of his time to capital, innocence, habeas, and prison cases, first with Holland and Knight, and for the past decade as director of Squire Patton Boggs Public Service Initiative, a working group that devotes itself to challenging pro bono litigation and projects. Working closely with his wonderful colleagues, his successes include prevailing in the Texas capital case Banks versus Dredge, freeing celebrated Louisiana prisoner Wilbert Rideau in 2005, freeing wrongly convicted Norfolk 4 client Joseph Dick Jr. in 2009 and exonerating him in 2016, freeing longtime Louisiana solitary confinement prisoners Herman Wallace in 2013, and Albert Woodfox and former child death row inmate Gary Tyler in 2016. George has taught courses on the administration of capital punishment at Yale, Florida State, St. John's, and currently teaches an externship on post-conviction remedies at Columbia. He has monitored Congress for the past 3 decades to defeat the expansion of capital punishment and limits on habeas corpus. He's the recipient of numerous professional awards and honors, including our committee award. So thank you all so much for being here. You're certainly each quite an inspiration to me. So I want to start just broadly. I know each of you has seen this film before tonight. I watched it again today. I'd like you each to just talk about, I guess, what initially resonated with you about this movie, what your initial reaction was.
I guess it was hard to watch. It was incredibly hard to watch. Personally, I guess it was a visual depiction of the thing that we as people defending people on death row work really, really, really hard, right? This is the walk everyone hopes to never take. And so it was done very realistically, and so it was very hard to watch. As I mentioned to you earlier, I watched it at home, and I had to keep turning it off and walking out of the room and taking a minute and come back, and I would turn it back on for a few minutes and watch it some more. And I'd turn it off and walk away. It was hard to watch. It's just, it reminds, I think it brought back for both Georgia and myself, many experiences of having come close to this or having actually taken this walk. So it's very painful to watch. It's a hard film.
I definitely agree. So living in those conditions and being a post-incarcerated person who served over a decade, and knowing, like my personal case, they didn't let me out until they locked all the cops up who locked me up. That's how I got out. And so with that, the small parts in the film, the lawyer fighting with no money, the activists outside, the details of the case on the radio that nobody's paying attention to, like it was a gun that wasn't even checked. So those little things, as a person directly impacted, being in that cell, in that cage, in that position, you're hoping that the world hears that part, and it's just kind of brushed over, which is a perfect representation of how society brushes over those evidence. And so for me, it's very difficult to watch, but it's an amazing film that I think can expound upon exponentially about the conditions. And secondly, there's very rarely that we consider the staff, right? As I was doing time, officers are doing time. Breakdowns in the same conditions and environments. And so to see the staff and really humanize everyone that's impacted by incarceration, that to me was a truth that wasn't Hollywood.
Yeah, I had much the same reaction that Christina had. This is an honest portrayal of how the death penalty touches everyone who gets close to it that I've ever seen in film. I talked to a lot of young lawyers who were curious, wanting to dive into this battle and end this horror in this country. And I have to tell them that, look, if you get close to this, it extracts a price. And I think one of the great strengths of this film, that is so beautifully acted, is that it really does touch people who get close to it. I wish, and I've said this to legislators, if you feel so strongly about having the death penalty, then you are to be the people who go down and bring the execution to it, because you're asking people to do something that is extremely difficult to do.
Five, you touched on this, but the portrayal specifically of the staff and of the warden, how does that track with each of your kind of individual experiences in this system?
Both in and out. So as an advocate and as an organizer, we've advocated, I've written books, my friend Nana was on death row before Anthony Graves was taken off of death row. And so death row is just the same as solitary confinement, closed custody, maximum security, you're isolated, you're away from your family, and you sort of have nothing but your memories and sort of to live off of. It's amazing how the details, if they were looked into, when you see all of the exonerations that are happening nowadays with the Innocence Project and other organizations, I remember them just opening the cell for me, like, hey, for the last decade, you've been talking about you ain't do nothing, you're innocent, all the cops that go through. It turns out you're right. It's $40 as a bus ticket. Good luck. And so that one moment changed the rest of my life. And throughout this film, I see him like waiting for that moment, like trying to figure out what's going on. The other thing is the small details of how you notice how your lawyer is struggling. Like when you first see him, he's like, that's where he eats some potatoes. Because he's stressed, he's working all day, and it impacts you because you end up feeling guilty for the person who's sort of going through this trauma to relate your life. The other part is, everybody gets broken up in prison. Mine was 1 year, 2 days in. Everybody gets that phone call or a visit like, I'm not coming back, I'm not so the impact of family, the fact that he's been there, I think resonates with me 15 years. The fact that he's been there since he was a child. The fact that he hasn't had no family. The fact that he has a child. A year before I came home, I found out I had a daughter. And so I came home to a 13-year-old after leaving for 12 years. And it's difficult. And for me, imagining that I only have a day after knowing, that's it, like 24 hours until I can try to capture that. It really resonates with me, but it's also the reality that it's the staff, right? That sees and witnesses parts of your life. When I was in solitary, I was on mail watch, and so they would read your letters. And so they know more about you sort of than you, even though they're trained to not talk to you, not to make eye contact, not to validate your pain and suffering or what you're going through. And so for me, those little points in the film really impacted, and it's necessary for the other work that I do, because if it wasn't for the voices outside, the activists, the organizers drawing attention, there wouldn't have been no attention toward him.
I think, to echo what Five has just said, our clients are always on death row for a long time. Unless you're very lucky, your client's going to be on death row for a pretty long time, even if you win. And the reality is that it's a life lived in a prison, and there are relationships developed, even under these terrible conditions, right? And so we would see, or I would see and hear, right, going to visit your client, prison guards saying, complimentary things, saying, listen, expressing, hope for your client's success or the case success. Because these people are living, as you said, right, in prison right alongside, the clients we represent. And so are they complicated relationships? Absolutely. Are they pure and appropriate relationships? Not at all. But they are real relationships. And so when an execution is coming, or when someone's under a death warrant, the folks that are working the prison are also really challenged by that.
Can I say, so clemency is a lot. I don't want to go into too much of the details of it because there's 3 different forms, and you sort of have to admit to what you've done, even if you feel like you haven't done it, or even if you're innocent, to get the application. That's another process. But the fact that, I don't want to talk about this. When I was in Auburn, I used to work hospice. And hospice is when you're literally watching people die. A lot of new officers, I didn't understand what they were going to. Until I got out and I started teaching their kids. And their kids would tell me, well, my dad, he's a pint of gin in the morning, like at night when he comes home, if he comes home, mandatory 48, sometimes 14 hours a day. Him and my mom been divorced. And the stress, the anesthetic load that they carry as well. You grow up with them. You have relationships with them. And so when I spent over a decade in prison, I'm with you for 10 years. We kind of know each other. I then did artworks, portraits of your kids, and it becomes a human relationship. And so even though incarceration and mass incarceration in this country, we get 2.5 million people incarcerated, over 100,000 people in solitary confinement just alone, that's even uncounted because we really can't count everybody. And we pay $8 billion a year just incarcerating kids alone. Everybody's invested. If you're not directly impacted, you're paying for it. If you're not there, like we did the film Solitary with Red Onion, another film we had to do on solitary. And the guards were like, is the coal mine or the prison? There is no choice for us. And so in New York State, we have 62 counties. All of our counties are named after the prison. So yes, the prison was built there, then people moved in and became a town. And so we also have to remember that, Ellis Island, we have Rikers Island. And so everybody came to America through here and learned about the prison system and actually having a commodity that your town can keep. So take this jail when you go into your town and you can keep these people there and actually make money off of them. And so since the abolition of slavery and black clothes, there has to be a system that downgraded that, and that became the prison industrial system. So we're still profiting off of people. We're still making money off of people. Certain rural towns are dependent on that prison system for employment, right? So we have to really think about not only the staff, but what other opportunities are we doing besides punishment, right? We live in a nation, and I think that we have to do better than that. Actually, I think we came up with that 500 years ago. Wow. We haven't made any adjustments. And so, as I do all these reports, I get to do the report about Rikers. It was built in 1650. Right? People don't know that. It's called Kevin Rikers. Please look it up. You go to the Incarceration Network. But we have a commitment to punishment and death too. And so I think it starts with how do we preserve life? Officers should be preserving life, and it's hard to do that when you have a death penalty.
I want to ask a question specifically directed at the lawyers. There's two scenes. There's two pretty intense scenes with the lawyers. There's one with Bernadine and the lawyer at the bar. You know, where he's basically saying to her, you know, on a good day, your client doesn't die, and he's had enough. And then the other scene where he's with Anthony in the visit booth, and Anthony just found out that he has a child, and you see the attorney just kind of instinctively trying to manage his expectations about that, given what is about to happen. So I guess it's a big question, but what, you know, in this sort of attorney-client relationship where the stakes are as high as they are, how do you sustain that, and how do you prepare? Who prepares you for that?
You don't do this by yourself. I've had clients executed, but the clients that we have saved, it's been a team, and it's exhausted everyone on the team. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of years to make that happen. I think in this film, when you get near the end like this, you want to protect your client. And it's when I watched that scene the first time, it was like, of course, this is a huge thing that's coming at a very, very difficult time. At the same time, I can tell you that I know a dozen cases where people have been executed, and in that last week of their lives, I've seen some of the sweetest reunions and reconciliations that I'll never see in my life. Of people who've been long out of my client's life or one of my colleagues' clients' lives, who all of a sudden comes back in before it's too late, and it's magical and marvelous. And so I think those scenes were quite accurate. Also, remember, the warden is like God. There's no public official in America who says the DAs who have unreviewable power. They do, almost. But the wardens really have unreviewable power. They, most of their decisions, the outside world doesn't know about it, and they get away with whatever they want to get away with. So when you have time with a warden, you do the best you can to get something, some favor or something, for your client, because they never have to give it. I'm just going to tell them that. So it's an odd relationship.
I think the thing that this gives you a slight peek into is it is a very unusual relationship, and usually it is a very long relationship. We are representing our clients 10 or 15 years or longer. And in that span of time, you know, it is my job, it is George's job to learn everything on earth about our clients, to know every, you know, detail of the worst moments of their lives, to know every single one of their relatives, to visit with every single one of their relatives. We have an ongoing, you know, very close relationship with our clients that is unlike any other lawyer-client relationship. And so when you're getting, you know, into this zone, it's very hard because, you know, I want to tell you that, you know, right, the lawyer in you says these are not your friends or these are not people that you're close with, but you know, I have now spent 15 years talking to you every single day, you know, every single week. You have a real, genuine relationship. They know about my daughter, right? We know each other incredibly well.
And their families.
And their families, absolutely. We spend time, we eat at their home, you know, the families' homes, you know, we are in and out our clients' lives writ large for years. And so when when you get to this time, it's very difficult to, to have, you have to do the job, right? You have to put the face on, and you have to do what you have to do. But it is not a normal space where you can just go in and say, I'm very sorry, sir, the time has come. Because you have literally put your entire heart, your life, your soul, right, the entire team into this. And so everyone in your client's family is looking to you, right, to pull out a victory, right? So it's an enormous amount of pressure, right, from their client, on yourself, from the team. So it's a very unusual and difficult relationship those kind of moments to navigate. Because like we're all human beings, right? We deal with an enormous amount of anxiety and pressure and guilt, and it's just, it's incredibly hard work, and it is not taught anywhere. It's not taught in law school for sure. Right? You learn it through, working with people more experienced than you, right? You sort of follow in the footsteps of those who have walked this walk before you. But it is an unusual relationship, and it's hard to navigate at the end when you're talking about execution dates. And we do all the things, I should say, right? We're doing the things that you're watching up there, right? Calling the family and having the conversation about we're going to have to get the body, transported, where are we going to have it go? Talking to your client about those things. We have to, these are literal conversations and decisions that are being made with your client in the end days. So it's extremely difficult.
And I should say, you shared with me when we talked earlier that there's a scene, there's a scene where the people, the staff are rehearsing for the impending execution, and you described kind of on the other side what the attorneys are doing to kind of prepare for that in a similar
in my
dress rehearsal case.
Yes, well, in my case, just in order, I was representing a person that was very close to an execution date, and, it became clear to me that we all needed to know what we were going to do, right, at every step to manage the chaos of what was going to come. And so we consulted actually with a psychiatrist from Yale who worked with us to make sure that, to the extent possible, I was going to try to mitigate the damage, right, to the people I was going to take into this execution with me. And so we had to come up with a protocol. Who was going to be, who was going to be with the family at every given time? Who was going to be writing at any given time? Who was going to be with the client at any given time? Who was going to get the family to the prison for their last visit? We had to just orchestrate this entire thing. What was going to happen in the office? Who was going to be in the office? And so exactly in the same way that they were sort of orchestrating what they were going to do, we also had to orchestrate what we were going to do sort of to manage the chaos of what was coming.
George, relatedly, you had mentioned earlier that I guess there's many ways that the warden's kind of trauma presents itself in the movie. Some of that is, drinking. Some of it is she can't sleep. It's coming out in different ways, and I think for all the actors in the system and the secondary trauma that presents, what's your observation of people in the system and how that tends to manifest, or how, at least for the lawyers that you're more familiar with, how and when that comes up, and how and when people actually might deal with that?
I think a lot of people are in denial about this is traumatic work. Your clients, most of them have had the most horrific childhoods imaginable. And you got to, as Christina said, you really got to get into that. You have to understand it. You have to be able to tell people about it in a compelling way. And there's no way to do that without diving in and really feeling a lot of that pain. And I frankly have some concern for people who've been doing this work for a long time, that they're going to have to do some work for them to really process what they've been through. Because one of the about this work is that you go from intense case to intense case, and there are lapses, but you don't really have time to process all that before you're off to another. There was a case that I had years ago in Texas where our client came within 10 minutes of execution. We were literally sitting in the prison, sitting with 3 family members. We were going to go off and witness the execution. And clock was getting closer and closer, and a warden came in and said that the stay has been imposed. And the night before, we had dinner together planning our client's funeral. That was a very highly charged 24 hours. And just the other day, I was thinking about things that I really hadn't thought about in that case for years. And I know that there's some other things I have to do. And that case did not end with an execution. That case ended with our client leaving death row, thank God. But it takes a lot out of people, and I think most of American corrections now understands that this is not a good thing. I've been at this long enough that when I first took a death case in 1979, there were young wardens in our prisons who had come in because of all the horrors of Brubaker and all these horrible things that happened in our prisons in the 60s and early 70s. And there were brave federal judges that cut this crap out, and a new generation of corrections people came in. But they didn't come in to kill people. And when the death penalty started to rise up again, Don Cabana was a wonderful warden in Mississippi, of all places. Executing 12 people killed that man early. That's not what he came to do. He came to see that when people came into his prison, they would leave healthier and better prepared to reach modern society. And we had some statistics at the beginning about how there's a lack of the death penalty is really dying off in a lot of places. We don't have a state now that uses the death penalty. We have counties. California's a huge state. There are 2 counties in California that still use the death penalty. Texas, believe it or not, 95% of the DAs in Texas never used the death penalty because this last 20 years has been rough on everybody. And let's just hope that it keeps going in that direction.
Can I just say that as an organizer, it is extremely difficult. Right? You get no funding to support the family. You work off of donations. You have to get them locations. You're sort of trying to advocate when you know that's right and change the law. Plus work with the lawyers, of course, who are sometimes it isn't easy. It isn't easy. I'm sort of the person who will do like artists, if it's like, if need be. Because we have to do everything we can to protect life. We act like this is not a human life, like this is not family, right? And so for the organizer, we're on the other side of this sort of fence when the family's like, we're not going to get home, we're not going to food, we're not going to eat, and it's hard, and that person being away for such a long time, you get that. Your kids know their kids. Like my sons are organizers and activists, and they know their children. And next thing you know, you're so entrenched that you're losing a person with an execution. You're literally losing a person. It does take a battle on you, but we don't get funding like that. And so there's no vacation time for us. There is no trauma-informed space, but you have to, or else you will break down. And so majority of people that come home, 50% of people die. I just had this conversation with the board of St. Louis Roosevelt and Mount Sinai, and they were building new stats around people who return home from incarceration. Hep C, mostly people die from heart trauma, and it's a different world that you're coming into from prison. And so to return home, even though people have clemency, they think that you're okay, like, oh, you got out. No, you're still struggling, you're 20, 30 years still behind, and so who's supporting that person? It's very hard for organizations. If you like any information, please visit Incarceration Network, and you can link to any of the projects in New York, but also around the country, because we sort of shamelessly create a hub, because we need all community involved. This is life, but you're paying for it as well.
I think we have a few minutes to open it up for a few questions in the audience. We have someone with a roving microphone who can.
Thank you. Really simple. I must have missed where, I know the warden at first said there's nothing she can do, but I did see the family in there in the execution execution, so I must have missed something. I don't know where it was. And I guess the gentleman on the end, George, he must have said that the wardens do have more power. You might have said that or something similar to that. But then also going back to, as a taxpayer, why should I pay for something that if there's a shred of doubt of innocence, why is it that we're just pushing along just to satisfy someone to say, well, that person was guilty, but there's a shred of doubt, and I don't want to pay for it. I don't even want to pay for it at all as a taxpayer, but if there's a shred of doubt, why is it just pushed through as if, oh, it's okay, we'll just kill this person to satisfy the media or the family of the person that was killed or whatever, you know what I'm saying? So I guess there's a question in there. I just don't know exactly how to.
The problem is nobody really wants to take responsibility. That's the problem. Like, there's a case right now in Florida, the Daly case. There was an extraordinary piece in the New York Times Magazine 2 weeks ago about a guy named Skelnick who was a snitch, a con man, a horrible guy who testified in 10 capital cases in Florida. We had a case, a client of ours, Skelnick helped put on death row. There's grave doubt about that case, way beyond Skelnick, but he came very close to being executed. And the governor now is going to decide in the next probably 30 days as to whether to reset that execution date. And there have been a number of people executed this year alone where there were profound doubts about it. But when the cases get that far along, nobody wants to take responsibility. And I think that the other thing with the warden is that she was not willing to give an additional seat to the victim's family. And that would not happen, at least in the experience I've had, is that there are strict numbers of there are 5 for the victims, 5 for the defendant, but if somebody came and asked the warden, can this other young person come, in every place I've been, that person will be accommodated.
I just wanted to add that I think one of the most powerful parts, there are many powerful parts of this movie, though, is that the first execution is as horrific as the second. And the first execution, there's not an issue of guilt, at least not presented in the film. And I think the point, I would draw from this is that, right, the death penalty is horrific for the guilty and the innocent. And I would say certainly George and I have represented people, who we have not advanced claims of innocence many, many times, right? I think both of us take the position unequivocally, right, that what's wrong with the death penalty is that it is a barbaric and horrendous punishment that only is applied to the poor, to the disadvantaged, to people of color. And it has nothing at all to do what's wrong with the death penalty is not about just innocence. So I just want to flag that.
I just also wanted to say, are you a New Yorker?
Well, I'm originally from Detroit, but I live here now.
Oh, great. So you pay about $20,000 per person on Rikers, and 97% of people there are innocent. They're just detainees, right? You also pay about $76 million just for upstate and Southport alone. That's just 2 out of the over 50-something solitary shoes that we have. So you pay an extraordinary amount. You wonder why we beat San Francisco for the most expensive place to live in the world? It is because we are probably per capita one of the largest jails, right? We had a jail that was the 20 or 30,000 any given day. It took me 10 years to chop that down, bail funds, so many collective projects around Rikers, and that cost a lot, right? So the cost of punishment is worse and actually easier to just send them to Columbia with a $50,000 scholarship than paying $70,000 to $100,000 per person, to be honest. Also, graduate from Columbia, so I know that flag.
Thank you.
This is going to be our last question.
Thank you for your work and thank you for being here. You spoke about abolishing capital punishment. Can you elaborate on the path there and specifically what the general public can do? Like, is it a Supreme Court judgment? Is it an act of Congress? Is it state by state?
The American death penalty is really in the States. We have Attorney General Barr trying to kill people on federal death row, but there are 70 people on death row. There were over 3,000 in the States, and the large majority of the people who have been executed in the last 30 years have been in the states. And what you're seeing is that states are repealing the death penalty, not quickly enough. But more importantly, prosecutors are not using it. In 1999, there were 300 people sentenced to death in this country. The last 5 years, there have only been 30 each year. That's a profound drop. Houston has put more people on death row and seen more executions from Houston alone than any other state in the country. There's a DA now who Christina knows very, very well, who basically has, for the most part, shut down the death penalty in Houston, and she's in a fierce campaign that she might lose to a candidate who would never seek the death penalty. Virginia, very efficient executioner. If you got on death row the last 30 years in Virginia, there was, with the rarest of exceptions, no relief in the courts, state or federal. You'd be executed in 5 or 6 years, much faster than anybody else. There hasn't been anyone death sentenced in Virginia in years, and in this last election cycle, there were 4 progressive DAs elected in some of the populous areas who said we will never use the death penalty. So organically, it is happening in unlikely places. And unless something really bizarre happens, I think we're going to continue to see that. What we're not going to see is we're not going to see the United States Supreme Court strike down the death penalty. There was a window that Justice Kennedy might have been interested before he left, but he did not grant cert or ask his colleagues to grant cert on that issue, and now he's gone. And this present court is not going to be very interested.
What we've done is organize state campaigns, and so we have to do state by state. And so we just switched our sort of method of working around solitary as well, so now we're creating individual state campaigns. And I know that that's going to have to break down to counties within that state. And so I think it's going to take people like you, even to write a letter to the legislator. Also, who knows who the assemblyman is?
The what?
Anybody know who the senator is? Anybody know who the city councilman is? Right, that's not a great enough number, right? So these people are paid for you. They're your voices. They actually have a place in the system to speak for you. Sometimes it just takes a handwritten letter or a visit, but also, why am I paying for this? We do a lot of events nationally. I did a panel on solitary in Princeton, and one of my students was like, my father's a huge racist, so I'm like, invite him. Right. He owns this big corporation. And so he tells me, like, can I be blunt? Be as blunt as you want. He's like, why am I paying so much money for these people to be in solitary? And I'm like, well, you should tell your legislator that. And I run into his legislative lobby, they was like, did you send that guy there with 10 of the businessmen who were just like, why am I paying for all these black people to be in prison? So your voice matters, right? And I think that as we are realizing how we're impacted or how we're contributing to it, we have an ability to say something and do something. So citizenship is that way, and oversight, which we don't do.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is to say that, of course, the death penalty is one end of the criminal justice spectrum, right? And so the things that Vi has talked about, about being in prison in New York, right? You have to understand that, right? That's an extreme end, but literally just one step down. It is equally horrendous, right? So we go, all of the horrors except the execution of people and what is going on, and who we are talking, who is in prison, who's serving life without parole, how they got there. It's the same universal circumstances. And so the fight to abolish the death penalty has to incorporate, right, a greater fight to make sure that we are actually treating people who go through the criminal legal system fairly, right? That people are getting qualified counsel, right? That you have a fighting chance to stay out of prison in the first place. And this is all local issues, right? This has, so we don't have a death penalty in New York. We have how many prisons, right? We have a whole bunch of prisons, right? And while we are now in the middle of a nice moment of criminal justice reform in New York City, there is still, thousands and thousands and thousands of people doing time upstate, and we haven't even begun to deal with those folks yet. So please understand that, right? The death penalty is just part and parcel of a system that is deeply flawed and deeply broken. And so, in any effort, if you're not able to address the death penalty, certainly addressing criminal justice reform, which is here, which is live, and which is active, is equally important.
And I think all the data shows since the 90s that all the trends are trending down. I think this was the first year that there was a Gallup poll that suggested a majority of Americans would support a sentence of life without parole if given the choice over the death penalty. as you both indicated, the next frontier is probably the fight against life without parole, which is a whole other set of human rights issues, but including prolonged use of solitary confinement. But certainly, I think there's reason to hope that that the capital system at least could be dismantled in Arlington. There will be no shortage of other fights to replace it. So, any last thoughts before we end?
I just have
I
just have a final thought that it's interesting that as I was watching this film, other film that came to mind was The Shawshank Redemption. And as I thought about the view of the warden in Shawshank Redemption, I realized that has been my view of pretty much all the wardens, I guess. I mean, I haven't really thought much beyond, I haven't thought about the mental anguish that they experience. So this was a very interesting take, and at least it brought insight into the psychological life that these people have to go through, this experience that they go through. And the film, of course, is so very raw and traumatic from beginning to end. It certainly is an opportunity to start looking at this with more thought.
And I think that's a good final note, because ending on the power of film, I think, to change people's perceptions of these issues and expose them to issues they haven't otherwise considered with this level of emotion or with this level of detail. So the film is going to be, I think, released nationally on December 27th. Part of these pre-screenings is to get people to see it and talk about it and encourage other people to see it when it comes to theaters. So please do that, and thank you very much for coming. I think you really
I want everybody to just really think about justice, right? Is it justice for one family that we're just going to kill someone else? Is it justice that we're going to hurt somebody to make you feel okay? And is it justice that if somebody hurts you, we'll disappear them and that's all we can do? Right? At your cost, though. So I just want to leave that little thought.